There is a person you grew up beside, maybe next door, maybe across the hall. Maybe they slept in the room 3 feet from yours for 18 years. You know the sound of their laugh from another room. You know how they take their coffee, the small scar on their knee, the exact face they make in the half second before they cry. By almost every measure, you love this person. And you feel nothing. Not coldness, something quieter than coldness, a door that was never once open. You could not feel drawn to them if you sat down and tried, and in your whole life you have never stopped to ask why. Tonight, you will. Because that blankness is not an accident. It is not shyness or bad timing or the simple fact that you see them like family. Something inside you made a decision about that person before you could speak a full sentence. It ran a silent calculation, closed a door, and quietly threw away the key. And it did all of it to protect a child you have never met. Yours. You never agreed to any of this, so who did? Start with the feeling itself, because it hides in plain sight. For most of your life, you've been told that attraction is chemistry, a spark, something that either catches or doesn't, mysterious and free. But there is a second system running underneath the spark, and it does the exact opposite. It does not light fires, it builds walls. It decides years in advance who you will never be able to want, and it makes that decision using one strange, specific clue. Not blood, not DNA, not who you are actually related to. Just this: who was in the house when you were small? In 1891, a Finnish anthropologist named Westermarck wrote something that got him quietly laughed at for most of a century. At the time, the loudest voice on human desire belonged to Sigmund Freud. Freud believed that deep down, children burn with a hidden attraction to their own family, and that all of civilization is a wall built to hold that dangerous urge back. Westermarck said the opposite. He said no wall is needed. He said the desire simply never grows in the first place. His claim was simple. Children who live in close physical closeness during the earliest years of life grow up unable to feel desire for one another. Not forbidden, not suppressed, just absent. Scientists today call this negative sexual imprinting, or the Westermarck effect, a heavy name for a soft rule. The people who are near you when you are very young become invisible to the part of you that later falls in love. But an idea is only an idea. For decades, no one could prove it. Then 2 accidental experiments, one in the villages of Taiwan and one in the deserts of Israel, proved it for him, and neither one was ever designed to. Go to Taiwan first. For centuries, some rural families there practiced an unusual custom. A family with a baby son would adopt a baby girl and raise the 2 of them together, side by side from infancy, so that one day, grown, they would marry. It saved the cost of a wedding, it tied 2 families together early. The little girl grew up inside the home of the very boy she was promised to, sharing his meals, his floor, his childhood. An American anthropologist named Arthur Wolfe spent much of his life reading through household records the Japanese colonial government had kept on these families, hundreds of thousands of pages of them. He lined these arranged, raised-together marriages up against ordinary ones, and he counted. The results were brutal. The couples raised together from infancy divorced far more often. They had noticeably fewer children. They looked outside the marriage for love and for sex at much higher rates. Everything had been arranged perfectly for a lifetime of devotion, and devotion refused to come. They had grown up as brother and sister. Their bodies never once got the message that they were now supposed to stop. Now cross the world, to Israel, to the collective farms called kibbutzim. For much of the 20th century, children on some of these farms were raised in a radical way, not by their own parents, but together in groups, eating, sleeping, washing, and playing side by side from their first days of life, like one large litter, dozens of unrelated children growing up closer than most true siblings ever do. A researcher named Joseph Shepard gathered the marriage records of nearly 3,000 of these grown children. He was hunting for one specific thing: couples who had been raised together in the same tight group since infancy and who later married each other. He found almost none. Out of thousands upon thousands of marriages, essentially 0 were between 2 people who had shared that earliest cluster of childhood. And here is the part that matters. It was not banned. No rules stood in their way. The elders often hoped openly that the children would grow up and pair off and keep the community going. The young people simply didn't. They loved each other deeply. They loved each other like family. And that was the whole problem. So the pattern held on 2 continents, in 2 cultures that had never heard of each other. Not blood, nearness. Whoever shared your first years, your brain quietly filed away as untouchable. But how?
How does a child far too young to read, too young even to count, run a calculation this precise? That is the question 3 researchers at the University of California, Deborah Lieberman, John Tooby, and Lita Kosmietz, set out to answer. In work published in the journal Nature, they mapped out what they called the brain's kin detection system. Kin detection is your mind's silent method of guessing who your blood relatives are when no one has ever actually told you. They found it leans on 2 clues and only 2. The first is watching your own mother. If, in your early years, you saw your mother hold and feed and cradle a newborn, your brain quietly stamps that baby with a single label: sibling, off limits. The second clue is simply time, the raw number of years you spent living under one roof with another child. The more years you shared, the more certain your brain becomes that this person is your kin, and the more firmly the door swings shut. And here's the strange, almost unsettling part. The system does not care whether it is right. It is not reading anyone's DNA. It is reading circumstances. Grow up close to a child you share no genes with at all, a step-sibling, an adopted sibling, the neighbor who was simply always there, and the very same wall goes up, just as high. Your brain guessed family, and then it acted on the guess with total confidence. Which brings you back to the door from the very start, the one that closed before you could speak. It closed to protect someone. Far back in your ancestry, the children of close relatives carried a hidden and terrible cost. When 2 close relatives have a child, the rare broken instructions buried in a family's DNA are far more likely to line up and switch on at the same time. Scientists call the result inbreeding depression. In plainer words, more sickness, more death, fewer children who survive. For 100,000 generations, that cost was real, and it was heavy. So evolution built a shortcut. It could never hand you a map of your own genes, so instead it handed you a feeling. Grow up close to someone and desire for them simply evaporates before it can even form. You never had to understand the reason, you only had to obey it. And now the reversal that almost no one sees coming. If the wall is built by childhood closeness, then what happens to the relatives who never got any? There are siblings separated at the very start of life, a brother and sister given to different families as infants, who never share a home, never a childhood, never one of those slow accumulating years. Decades later, some of them meet for the very first time as adults, and a startling number of them report something they are terrified to say out loud, a sudden, overwhelming, disorienting pull toward each other. 2 researchers, Maurice Greenberg and Roland Littlewood, documented this again and again in adults reunited with lost blood relatives, and they gave the phenomenon a name: genetic sexual attraction. It is the Westermarck effect running backward. The aversion between blood relatives was never automatic. It was never written directly into the genes. It had to be installed in childhood by all those shared in ordinary years. Miss that window, grow up apart, and 2 people who should feel the strongest wall of all can feel the exact opposite instead. The same quiet system that shields almost every one of us leaves these few completely unguarded. So come back to now, back to the person you grew up beside, the one whose laugh you know from another room. The blankness you feel toward them is not a flaw in you, and it never was. It is one of the oldest safety systems you carry, still humming faithfully in the dark, decades after its work was done. Every time you look at a childhood friend and feel that warm, sealed, immovable no, you are feeling a machine that has been guarding your children and their children since long before your species even had a name. So here is something to sit with tonight. Picture the one person you were closest to as a small child. Now imagine you had never met them at all. Imagine the 2 of you were introduced today for the very first time, as strangers across a crowded room. Would the wall still be standing, or would you be looking straight at the one person you were quietly built to never truly see? There is a person you grew up beside. You know the sound of their laugh. You know the scar on their knee and the face they make just before they cry. And you feel nothing. Except now you know it was never nothing. It was the most careful kind of love your body knows how to give. The kind that protects you by staying shut. A door posed gently, a lifetime ago, by a child who was only ever trying to keep someone safe. You.